All right, everybody, welcome back to another special edition of Corona Geek. I'm here with Julian Stokoe, one of the authors of 12 Huia Birds, a book about an extinct animal that has been brought back to life through interactive media and print. So, Julian, thanks for joining me.
Yeah, good to be here, Charles.
You're located where?
New Zealand, Auckland, New Zealand.
And this is all New Zealand. The bird itself is actually an extinct New Zealand bird, is that correct?
That's right, yes.
Okay, so let's get into that then. Let's talk about, first of all, you put together an interactive app, of course, using Corona. Then you've turned that into a print book. So just, if you would, let's back up a little bit. Tell me about the birds, tell me about the bees, tell me about how this idea came about and how it turned into a print book.
Yeah. Well, I've always been fascinated by the Huia bird. It was quite a magnificent bird. The male and female had different beak shapes, which made them quite unique in the world. They're quite large, very friendly bird in the forest. If you went in there, they'd come bounding up to you. Maybe too friendly for their own good, because it was quite easy for them to be captured. They were too magnificent for their own sake. People wanted to have them on their mantelpiece. So they were last seen in 1907, and we haven't heard much about them since. And so I just thought it was a real travesty that we don't know really much about them at all. A lot of New Zealanders have heard of Huia, but they don't even know what it is really. And in fact, it became extinct in the general area where I was brought up, and I didn't learn about it in school or anything. So it seemed to be a gap missing there for kids to hear more about it and to learn the lessons really about what we've lost in the past, so that we can stop losing magnificent creatures going forward. So that was the general sort of background behind going ahead with it.
If you didn't learn about it in school and it's not necessarily generally known, how did you become aware of the story then?
Yeah, I guess just bits and pieces. It's on Wiki, and it used to be on a coin and on the stamps and things. So you'd come across it. I think as a designer, I've sort of come across the bird and gone, wow, that's amazing. It seems to sort of like be an awesome sort of a bird, the best bird even, that we had in New Zealand. It was the king. It was known as the king of the forest. So it would have been the biggest bird in the forest itself, and would have just sort of reigned over them all, really. So yeah, I sort of just had seen a lot of that and was just interested by it visually, I think.
So what's the transition then from that just being sort of a bird that's generally seen on currency and that sort of thing into a full story? How did you make that leap? Yeah,
so I've got a huge folder of ideas that I add to, and the Huia story was getting bigger and bigger, and it seemed like it was time to put it out there in some format. And while that was happening, developing story ideas for interactive media and using Corona to create our last app, Have You Heard? And so the Huia story seemed like it was the one to pick for our next go.
Now, I introduced you as an author and developer of the app, but you also said something about being an illustrator. Did you do the artwork for this app?
No, that was Stacey Isles.
Okay.
Yeah. Who lives in
It has a very distinctive feel to it. It adds to the texture of the story. So how much did that play into the storytelling element?
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? It's like the human figures, for instance, they're rendered quite mysteriously. You just see their eyes and things, because the idea of it being from the perspective of the Huia bird itself, how would it sort of see humans these strangers, coming into their habitat for the first time, and they'd see these unusual little eyes peering out. And it doesn't sort of give so much personality to these strangers and to the pests, the rats and cats and things. We don't want to sort of give them too much personality. So that was sort of part of the brief going on there. And just to sort of, Stacey's style is very sort of graphic. It's not so realistic, and so it's got a lot of straight lines and curves and lots of sort of use of colour and gradients.
So now, as you went along, you went from sort of again concept to story to artwork. Was that the flow of it? I mean, you had the story first, and then the artwork comes later, and then it gets turned into an app. Kind of give us an idea of what the workflow was like.
Yeah, I suppose writing the story, you sort of lay it out as well in your mind. You sort of sort of draw up generally where the images might sort of support the text. So you can remove part of the story and just have the images tell it. And then from there, we use Photoshop, and we go out from there to PNG sequences using a plugin called Cut, which is part of the Quickshare plugin, I think. We use that all the time. It's great. And we've got our own little scripts and things that outputs where all the images are and how big they are, etc. And then we've got the framework where it sort of sucks in those files and reads them and turns them into the appropriate graphics. And then we sort of get in under the hood and add interactivity from there. So the process is quite quick, really, getting from Photoshop into Corona. And then from there, there's this more extreme file development that occurs there with animation and sound.
Now, I did read that one of the main focuses that you tried to implement was is interactivity, having sounds and the reader being able to interact with the book. So, because the bird is extinct, how did you come up with the sounds?
Yeah, well, there's a couple of notations that exist, musical notations of people who had heard it, because they hadn't recorded the sound back in those days. They didn't have the devices in 1907. So the main way is notations that were written down, and the other way is that it was a guy had whistled it from memory. So he remembered it as a child and whistled it for the New Zealand radio service in the 1950s. So that recording still exists. So you can go and sort of hear that online. In the 1950s, of Hanari Hemana had whistled what he remembered the Huia to sound like as a kid. And we used that and the notations and recreated that in the sound studio and took some license from the descriptions and what have you, and created a whole cache of Huia sounds all back from the other world.
Well, that's fantastic. Yeah, what an amazing endeavor. So, apart from workflow and tools and things like that, recreating sounds of dead birds, what was? I know that this is a digital application. It lends itself to interactive, interaction. And so, what was the inspiration then to turn it into a physical book?
Well, the people who were involved in editing the story at Oratia publish print books and thought that would make a great print book. And so that was in the back of my mind that that might happen after we had finished the app. And I'm just really interested by the way that apps can work with real world objects or with other products, really, instead of an app saying, here is just the one app. Having sort of like the book and the app working somehow together. I mean, they don't actually work together, as it were, I suppose. They're more sort of complementary. If you like the book, you might want to go ahead and learn more by downloading the app. And if you like the app, then you might want to go, if you see the book on the shelf, you might want to pick it up. But they don't actually, I think it's still to discover really ways in which apps and books can sort of work together with synergy. I've seen some augmented reality books that you open up and you aim your device and things spring up, which was novel and fun, I guess. Yeah, I think that's certainly interesting, that world, and maybe as interactivity adds more to the experience, it could be an interesting area.
Well, given that you've gone to the lengths to reproduce the sound of an extinct animal, I certainly, as I thumbed through the book, would want to hear the sound. So that would entice me to go and download the app just out of sheer curiosity.
Yeah, true. Yeah.
So I know we have a lot of designers in the community. We also have book authors and things like that. So, what do they need to know? What kind of advice could you give them if you could say, hey, turn your app into a physical book, or maybe even vice versa, turn your book into an app? What would you say to them? What's the first thing that you think of?
I guess, probably partner up with a developer, I suppose. In terms of, if you're a writer and you've never written any code, then it's a learning curve, but it's a really fantastic one to do as a creative person, to go in and learn code, really, because I think creatively you use one sort of part of your thinking, the mushy kind of gooey side of your thinking, And then code is very strict and things, which is quite satisfying when you're sort of normally in the abstract world of creativity and where things don't really have a true or false answer. And then to come into development where it's like, yes, no, if you've missed a comma out there, then, it's not going to work. So that's quite satisfying. So I'd recommend to people to get in and learn some code really. But if they can't see themselves doing that, then I guess try and get onto the forums and put the word out to work with a developer.
Now, did you do some of the coding yourself, or all of the coding? How much of it were you involved in?
I remember I've done some computer studies back in 1985, working with System 80s and Commodore 64s. And so that's sort of ingrained in my mind, I think, how basic sort of computer language works. And more recently, working with Flash, doing animation and Flash kind of come together, and suddenly you're learning some more code there. So I've sort of just had a little background of that. So coming into Corona was incredible, really, because it was like, wow, it was all the things that I remembered, and here it was in an even easier way to use. So it was just a great revelation to get involved.
So as you're creating 12 Huia Birds, is there a character that you identify with, or that you like, or that was interesting to make? What's your favorite?
Yeah, well, that's the thing about the book in a lot of ways, is that the bird, the Huia Bird, is the main hero really of the story. So I would have to say the Huia Bird, I think. But certainly there's human characters at the periphery. So there's the character of the Duke of York, who's the future King of England, George V. And he comes to New Zealand one time. This is after the local people said, no, we've got to stop killing the Huia Birds. Let's put an end to that. And so, okay, everyone's going to try and look after it. And then the Duke of York turned up and was presented with a Huia feather, which he put into his hat. And then all the lords and ladies around the world had seen the feather and wanted one too. And because there was such great demand for the feather, and that was really the end of the Huia at that point. Hunters went in and were coming out with hundreds on sticks and things to service the fashion industry, which had risen up around the desire for the one feather. So that character, I think, the Duke of York in this case, is not his fault that he was given the feather, but he's certainly an interesting aspect to the story of the Huia, really.
Well, that's very interesting. I love it. Where can people find the book? Where should they go to get the app? Is it available on iOS and Android as well?
That's right. Yeah, both of those. Even if they just put Huia, Huia, in the search, then it'll be the only Huia book or software at all that will come up. And the book itself, you can get onto our website, Yuzu Books, or oratia.co.nz, and you can order a copy there as well.
Now, is that through a publisher that you work with, or is that you, or what's that?
So Oratia is a separate publisher, who I had worked with on the story for the app. They'd worked to copy edit the story, and so when they read it, they enjoyed it, wanted to publish it.
Okay, well, excellent. Well, I will put links in the show notes to that. I definitely recommend that people check out the app. Anytime that you go to the links to recreate the sounds of an extinct animal from the memory of someone who heard it when they were a child, it's certainly worth spending a few minutes enjoying it and learning a few lessons along the way as to how to be good stewards of our environment.
Yep, excellent.
Thank you, Julian.